everyone present here. I would like to thank Sishis and Dr. Maya Wagner for this opportunity. So today I'll be talking about Kashmiri's rights versus state. Um, so moving on, 1 second. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so I would just I would like to start by asking you, which of these two images do you usually associate when you hear
Your
the
voice
term?
is, I think we need, your voice have to be, it has to be enhanced. It's not very clear to us.
Okay, should I just go ahead?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Maybe you can.
Singh became became the rulers of Kashmir. After that, during the partition, we know Raja Hari Singh was the monarch, and then there were rebels protests in Kashmir, and they signed the instrument of accession with India, and that's how India had removed the rebels from Kashmir. Post this fast forwarding, so the introduction of the conflict is that during the partition, the scenario was because of the two nation theory, there were different players who wanted strategic control or even like statehood of Kashmir, who are interested in the statehood of Kashmir. Now, China also seems to play an important role here because of the border dispute on the eastern side. It has not accepted any of the border agreements and has occupied Askai Chin since 1962, and adjoining region of Trans-Karakoram Tract was seceded by Pakistan to China in 1965. So Kashmir is now basically administered by three countries, that is India, Pakistan, and the People's Republic of China. So moving on to the next slide, we've already talked about the partition and the accession to the Indian Union. Wars of 1962 and the proxy war between India and Pakistan in 1948, then followed by wars in 65 and 71, all play an important role in the conflict history of Kashmir. But then in the interest of time, I would like to move forward. Moving on to the insurgency, the start of insurgency and then the exodus of Kashmiri Pandits, disputed state elections in 1987 in the Indian administrated Jammu Kashmir give impetus to pro-independence insurgency centered around Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front. India accuses Pakistan of fomenting the insurgency by dispatching fighters across the line of control, which Pakistan denies. In 1990, the insurgency escalates after the Indian Army kills about 100 demonstrators. Attacks and threats lead to the flight of almost all the Hindus from the Kashmir Valley area of the state. So post this, in the 1990s, during the period of 1990s, the insurgency continues with Kashmir militants training in Pakistan and India deploying hundreds of thousands of troops in Jammu Kashmir. Violence against civilians by both sides is widespread. During the rising insurgency and Islamic militancy in the Kashmiri Valley, Kashmiri Pandits were forced to flee the valley. They were targeted by militant groups. On 4th January 1990, Srinagar-based newspaper released a message threatening all the Hindus to leave Kashmir immediately. In the preceding months, around 300 men and women, Kashmiri Pandits, had been slaughtered and women raped. Mosques released a statement in which a loudspeaker asked Hindus to leave Kashmir without their women. In 19th January 1990, Kashmiri Pandits fled Kashmir due to atrocities such as killing and gang rape. It was described by some authors as the worst massacre in Kashmir's history. Next is the Kargil conflict, which is also a military confrontation between India and Pakistan in the Kashmir region. It was highly feared. The entire globe, it received worldwide attention due to the fact that 1 year prior to that, both India and Pakistan had attained nuclear capability. However, this conflict remained confined only to the Kargil region. Next, moving on to the recent incident of abrogation of Article 370 and 35A. So India's decision to abrogate Article 370, a constitutional provision that granted special status for part of Kashmir, it controls divided political opinion in the country. So I'd like to present both sides of the argument. First, the supporters say that it allows union government to better coordinate federal and state resources. Second is that these special provisions, they say, only has facilitated enormous leakage from Indian treasury in conjunction with security situation, and also inhibited investment in sustainable local economy. So this move, they say, now has the so because of this move, they say Kashmir now has the potential to do infinitely better. The opposers say that the short and medium term damage caused by this decision will greatly outweigh the theoretical long term benefits. The violence, secondly, they talk about the point that the violence to India's democratic culture. The government, they say, has changed basic constitutional relationship of the people of Jammu and Kashmir to the Republic of India without consulting them or the elected representatives. This is important to note that Kashmir itself was literally plunged into dark while this coup was carried out. The vast majority of Kashmiri citizens were forced to live in a near total blackout when their status was being transformed. So basically what the crux of the presentation is the human rights and its impact. So human rights not only concerns people of Kashmir, but also includes the security forces, that includes the Indian Army, the paramilitary forces, and the Jammu Kashmir police. So while carrying out terrorist and counter-infiltration operations to control foreign-sponsored terrorism, they're losing their precious lives as soldiers and also facing tremendous hardship. Not to talk of the trauma for fighting their own land and being accused of causing harm to the civilians of their own country. Second thing I want to address is the human rights issues of the minorities. The hapless Hindu refugees who entered Jammu Kashmir at the time of the partition. These generation of refugees therefore have been denied basic rights such as right of citizenship, employment, education, and ownership of property. The Simbal camp is the residence of mostly Sikhs and some Hindus during the Holocaust of the partition who ran out from Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. They did not get any compensation for the properties lost to their ancestral homeland on the premise that they will get it back when POK becomes a part of the Indian Union. But it's interesting to note that they're still called the Simbal camp because even after years of living, they're still staying in refugee camps. The third thing I want to address is women in particular and also children. So Kashmiri women are reportedly said to be high prone to suicidal tendencies due to conflict situations. And just like the previous speaker mentioned, the fear, stress, tension, and uncertainty in prevailing in the state are said to be the main reasons for this. Like women in other conflict zones, they've been jailed, raped, tortured, maimed and killed. So Kashmiri women are among the worst sufferers of sexual violence in the world. Due to the impact of the conflict, a number of people, men and women, in the valley suffer from various psychological problems such as anxiety, mood, post-traumatic disorders. At the beginning of the insurgency, there were 1,200 patients in the valley's sole psychiatric hospital, but in 2016, the hospital is said to have been overcrowded with more than 1 lakh patients.
Kriti, you have 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry for that.
Yeah, it's fine. So next thing I want to cover is how in COVID, Kashmir, already being in the world's longest lockdown, has survived. So according to newspaper reports from the area, anyone who violates the curfew is being risked by detained by soldiers, police, or possibly beaten, even if they have some valid reason to go out. Even doctors are being harassed on their way to work in Kashmir, which already suffers an acute lack of medical resources on their way to work in Kashmir, which already, so limited access to information, such as the region uses only 2G internet, an online connection that is so slow and that it's non-existent elsewhere in the world. Early in the pandemic, Kashmiri healthcare providers also notified that it took an hour for them to download the international recommendation for COVID patients in intensive care. And although everything has stopped in the valley, I feel militant activity has not. Further, it is interesting to note that Kashmir is the Indian occupied Kashmir is the most militarized place on the earth. There is 1 soldier for every 30 civilians. For 7 months, people were forbidden from leaving their homes. All forms of communication, including the internet, phone lines, post offices were suspended. Deadly clashes erupted in the streets. And Kashmiris who were recently reconnected to the world are now living under a stricter curfew due to the pandemic. So moving on, I would just like to list the possible course of action for the resolution of the conflict. That is, we need to, first is the cessation of violence. And this could be achieved through international pressure so that it could put an end to training camps and monetary assistance by Pakistan. So second is that Indian change in India's foreign policy, that it should resolve its issues with China before moving on to Kashmir issue. Because if Pakistan and China are allies, the strategic position of Kashmir may not allow for the resolvement of Kashmir issue. Third is the territorial dispute must be resolved because it is important that would lead to a sense of identity to the Kashmir people. Fourth is the full integration of Kashmiris with India. So we should encourage private investment in Kashmir now that the Article 370 has been removed. So finally, restoring local structures that can engage with current political realities. So who are we to comment on how the situation should be handled in Kashmir rather than the people themselves? So working with their networks within the region can form the basis of rebuilding future. But first, we must reinvigorate hope by restoring local structures so that they can engage in dialogue efforts to create new possibilities of capable for addressing all the core issues. Finally, I would just like to post from an ethical perspective that all of these, the entire issue is based on constructs such as religion, human rights, statehood, citizenship, anything it might be. All of this is human constructed. So essentially, it can be seen as some sort of imagined reality. So from an ethical perspective, if you view this, the entire debate, I feel like all of this should not be given precedence over the human rights per se, because humans are more dignified than what they're being subjected to in Kashmir. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, Kriti, to nudge